Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
Before we get started, I want to invite you to come to Unwind, a free drop-in practice session that I'm leading each week on Zoom. It lasts about 30 minutes and just long enough, hopefully, to fit between all your other tasks and to-dos. Each week, I give a brief science-backed tip to help with stress management or well-being enhancement. Then we spend about 15 minutes in a guided relaxation, meditation, or contemplation practice. Lastly, we end with a few minutes for discussion and personal connection. I encourage people to make the session work for themselves, so if you prefer to call in or keep your camera off, that is just fine. You can get more details and sign up to get the Zoom link and call-in information at drkateking.com/unwind. Hope to see you there. Hello, I'm Dr. Kate King.
And I'm Alex Gugge. In this episode, we talk to Deirdre Fay about the core skills she's developed to help people heal from trauma and about our foundational attachment needs.
Deirdre Fay has decades of experience exploring the intersection of trauma, attachment, yoga, and meditation. She teaches, quote, a radically positive approach to healing trauma. She developed the Becoming Safely Embodied skills, which are the basis for her new book, Becoming Safely Embodied, a guide to organize your mind, body, and heart to feel secure in the world.
You can learn more about Deirdre, get this episode's show notes, and join our email list at noblemindpodcast.com. We hope you enjoy the show. We are with the wonderful Deirdre Fay. Welcome. Would you like to tell our listeners about yourself?
Sure. Well, what a pleasure to be with the wonderful Alex and Kate. So right back at you. So I am fascinated with how we each build an inner platform inside, a solid, safe, internal container, so that we can feel steady and secure and unshakable in the face of life's complications and turmoils. And we all know that happens. You know, as much of life as we've gone through, we still need ourselves to be present when life goes kaflooey, because it will. So along with that, that's been my quest in life. I've written 3 books. I've co-authored another book and written several chapters in another book, and still amazes me that I've done that.
Deirdre is a friend of our show. This is her second time here. And if people want to hear a little more from Deirdre, also, you can listen to our earlier episode with her. So we're going to dive a little deeper this time and talk about her new book, Becoming Safely Embodied. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the sort of the inspiration and foundation for this new book?
Sure. So these skills that I outline in this book, everything in this book, actually everything I write about probably is because it's how I used life and what I learned to help myself heal. Back in the 80s, my own trauma history came up and I didn't know what to do. The trauma field was really new at that point, and I was living in a yoga ashram, and I'd been able to sit and meditate, do a lot of yoga multiple times a day. I was training for triathlons, and suddenly when my history came up, boom. And I was like, what happened? What happened to me? I was able to do it before. I can't now. What goes on? And how do I get back? How do I be able to be inside myself again? So that was really the genesis of it, my own history. And I wanted to know what to do. I wanted to know what to do with all the feelings and the thoughts that were flooding my mind and just causing chaos. So I realized I needed this, and I'm sure that other people did too. But it was really when I went to my training after I left the ashram, Bessel van der Kolk heard about the work I was doing at one of the hospitals here in the area and invited me to join his clinic, the trauma center. And I wanted to explore a body-based approach to healing trauma, which eventually became the Becoming Safely Embodied skills. And they were so successful that at one point I was running so many groups at a time that Janina Fisher, who used to send all our clients to groups, said, what are you doing there? Why are my clients getting better so much faster? And she ended up joining me and leading the groups. And so we did that for a number of years. It was really, just so heart fulfilling to see people grow develop and flourish. And I kind of feel I'm a little countercultural in some ways. I feel like, yes, trauma is one of the hardest things to go through, but it doesn't mean we have to stay crushed into the ground and like victims to our experience. It's very possible to change that pattern. We just have to know how to organize ourselves inside. And the BSE skills are really small, simple skills, very practical, very concrete, that help people say, okay, I'm here. I'm going to just turn a little bit and try something different, and then let the energy flow and take me in a new way. So that's what really it's all about. And in this book, I've added a bunch of the attachment stuff that I've been doing that aren't or haven't been part of the group skills that I was teaching. And now I wanted it to be accessible to anybody who wanted to use it, and not just in groups or not just in therapy. And so I have about a compilation of what I've learned about 13 years of study in attachment theory, and why trauma doesn't heal is often because of these unmet attachment needs. And so I came up with 7 fundamental attachment needs that every single one of us needs. And if we don't get those needs met, we feel ashamed of ourselves. We feel like there's something wrong with me because I'm not getting that need met. And I should have had that need met when I was a kid. But if I didn't now, how do I repair that and shift it and have a better life for myself? So that's what this is all about.
Seems like it's a map and guidebook for how to recover from trauma, would you say?
I would. And you know what? In some ways, my idea for that comes from a lot of the ancient wisdom traditions, which are very much bound, and you have to harness the energy that's inside and direct it in the way you want to go. The Lojong teachings in the Buddhist tradition, and certainly all of the teachings in yoga, is that here's this powerful life force that's moving through us. Prana is just coursing through us. And how do we harness it and put riverbanks around it so we actually know how to flow it, so that rather than feeling chaotic from the energy, we can actually say, okay, let's move it toward a goal for what we want. And to me, that made so much sense, like learning how to do that. But most of us in our worlds haven't learned how to do that. We didn't learn it growing up, and then we're ashamed of it. And so we sort of hide and pretend we know how to do it. But there's a way, very simple ways to make it flow so that it's easier and we can get to where we want to go, which is a better life in simple terms.
Yeah. Really appreciate the message of hope that you have for people who've had trauma, that it doesn't have to define your life or be the end of the story, that there's lots of skills that you can build and ways to heal from this. So just really valuing that. And
you know what's so fascinating is that the intersection of trauma, attachment theory, and the ancient wisdom traditions, there's so much hope in that. What I've pulled a lot from is the attachment theory, which is really like, this is our native longing for connection with ourselves and with others. And when we can be with that longing and let it grow and let our body actually have that inside instead of shutting it down, it becomes our inner guidance. And this is so aligned with the ancient wisdom traditions, that there's something inside we can trust to guide us. And the thing, and I write about this in the BSE book, is like, how do we know? Like, what is it inside of us that says it shouldn't be like this? Because there's going to be multiple times a day when something happens and we're like, oh, shoot, I don't like this. It shouldn't be like this. It's not fair. But what inside of us says it shouldn't be like that? If it's supposed to be like that, we just be like, okay, handling it. But something inside us fights. And that's what I'm so interested in helping people name and then harness and then say, okay, you don't want it to be that way. What way do you want it to be? That protest, that inner protest we have, is actually pointing us in the direction we're supposed to go in. That's where life gets interesting and a lot more fun to live instead of being crushed.
It's almost harnessing the information that contained in triggers and neediness,
right?
Which is the information that about needs and where life wants to go forward.
Right. It dawned on me that, because I was a shame-filled human being. I was like, oh my God, everything is wrong with me. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. And I started looking at that. And I started talking to people, expert after expert, saying, how do I heal this shame? I don't want to be ashamed of myself. But it was only as I dealt with my own attachment and started diving into the theory that I realized, oh, this is so normal. Of course I want to be loved. Of course I want to get reassured and get comfort. Of course, like how normal that every single one of us, how normal that we want to be delighted in, how normal that we want guidance and help to move ourselves along. Like like it shouldn't have been such a revelation. But since it was so not familiar to me, I just shamed myself. And that's where I began to put together, when we get triggered, we're getting triggered because these needs aren't met. But because we're so used to pushing those needs down, when we get triggered, we don't know how to access that. Yet if we can begin to say, I'm getting triggered, what do I need? And then say, let that need come up and say, what would be more nourishing than this lousy situation I'm in, or this feeling that I'm having, or this thought? Then it's an organic process. It's really what we call bottom up. Somebody in one of my professional community the other day was talking about how they realized when they could just sit and be with it and get what they needed, there was like a moment of ease. And that's what it's like. Like, how can we linger in the ease and then let the next moment unfold and the one after that? And that's where that guidance starts showing us the path.
You had mentioned these foundational attachment needs. You mentioned a list of 7 that you sort of come up with. Could you give us a little sense of what those are for those of us who perhaps maybe aren't so connected to our attachment needs and need the list to start with?
It's so true, man. So basic to it, I think all of it, I don't usually think of it as like a linear thing, but I think fundamentally or primary to them all is the need for safety and safeness. It's sort of like if we don't have that basic in place, nothing can happen. And that safety and safeness is both the physical safety and the emotional and psychological safety. Safeness. It's a distinction Paul Gilbert gave me years ago. So when I have that distinction, I want physical safety, but I want to know that I'm safe inside. What is that? And for many people, that's a huge thing. What are the signals of safeness? So that's big. And then beginning to explore, how do I belong? If we didn't belong to our family, to our tribe, to our community, there's so much shame because we should belong. We should have been part of. So that's such a really, really big, important one. There's a lot around being attuned to. Can I attune to myself? Can I attune to you? And what is that like? How do I know how to do that? And what tends to happen is that if we don't know how to attune to ourselves, we build a self on top of that. There's all this stuff going on inside of us, but we don't know what it is. And we got to deal with the world. And so there's this separation that happens and we build the self on top of us. And that gets hard. That gets to be really, really complicated. And so we need to learn how to actually have a bridge inside to be able to be here with ourselves and be with it, whatever is going on inside of us, our body, mind, and heart, all of it. So safety, safeness, belongingness, attunement, getting reassurance and comfort. And if we don't, how ashamed we are that I need comfort. So that's one. Having somebody express delight in us. I know it from inside of me that we're we get shocked. And then we're like, oh, no, you don't know. It's not really that good. I'm not really that wonderful. But one of the needs of every human being, and certainly children, is to know that they're special, that they're unique, that there's nobody else like them at all. And when a child gets that, it's not a narcissistic need. It just fills their being. It's like, and then they can be there with others, recognizing there's room for all of us. So that's a powerful, powerful need that can get met. So there's that. Then getting guidance and mentoring. Big, big, big. And we see this all the time with kids. There's a lot of research on it in the attachment world of when parents go in and try to do the task for the child. And instead of letting the child figure it out or helping, how do you break apart a big task into small steps so that people can actually take the next step without getting overwhelmed by it. So that's a huge piece. Carlin Lyons Ruth calls it scaffolding in her language. And she works with parents and coaches in the attachment world. Then I added a whole piece around the importance of knowing how to repair conflict. Like most of us don't know, conflict scares the bejesus out of us and we just get so lost in that. But yet when we actually know how to repair conflict, the relationship gets stronger and more powerful. And what a relief that is for most of us. That builds a deep level of trust in ourselves and in the world. So that's essential to do. And then this sense of not taking life personally, to let things roll off our back, to just be at ease with the world. That's so important. And yet many of us haven't learned how to do that. It comes about when people see the best in us. When we realize like accumulation of all of that, we're safe enough in the world. So those are what I think are really like so primary, so I have lots of ideas how to go with them. But when we have them and we start getting them, and in fact, that's what started healing my own shame. It's like, oh, how normal I need it. I used to teach about that being needy was like a 4-letter word, except it's 5, but we feel like it's like the worst thing in the world to have needs. And yet when we get that need, we realize, and we're with people who say like, it's totally cool. I get it. Then our whole system goes.
Yeah, I just love that reclaiming neediness idea that you've been talking about and discuss in the book a bit, because I do think, that is so pathologized, or, in this sort of individualistic kind of culture. There's this like, I'm not supposed to have needs. And being needy is like the worst sort of put down you could imagine. So to be able to sort of take that word and say, hey, actually, like being needy is cool. That makes sense. It's okay. Like we're allowed.
Got that in some ways also from my Sufi teachers who said, if you don't have that neediness, you're not going to find your way to God, to the divine. And I was like, oh, right.
Love it.
Right.
Love it. Right. Connected to a longing to connect.
Right. And the longing in the transformational model I've created is actually the rocket fuel that gets you where you want to go. Because once we step outside of our comfort zone, we're like, yeah, I want to do this right. And then we're like, oh no, what was I thinking? Right. And if we stay connected to that longing and we let that longing fill our bodies and our hearts, then we're like, okay, I can navigate this.
And a significant part of the book also works with how to build a fulfilling life based on these internal longings. So it goes beyond healing to flourishing to spirituality.
I love that you noticed that, Alex. Yes. To me, it's really much how do we grow, develop, and flourish? And the intention, and certainly in our communities, we have 2 communities for the general population and also for professionals. You can flourish. You can find a way. You will find a way. And how do we help you see that path? And how are we going to hold you, care for you, and mirror back the best in you so you feel safe to take those steps forward?
So your book is really framed around skill building and teaching these 9 core skills to help people grow and heal and flourish, as we're talking about. Maybe we could just sort of dip our toe into maybe all 9 if we get to them, or just whichever ones kind of we could bounce around.
Sure. The idea of the skill building comes from that whole piece from the attachment world of how do you break apart a big topic so that people can take the next step. And I know people who've been meditators for a long time, they actually use one of the skills in meditation that I break down into small bits, and they're like, oh, now I know how to do this and take that step. And that's what so many of us need, not to just jump ahead and think we should know how to do it, but, oh, okay, let me make this more granular, smaller, so that the next step is like an automatic flow. Robert Maurer, who used to be at Stanford, talked about micro commitments that you take. How do you make such a small step that your body doesn't go into fears, blocks, and resistances about it? So it's like, oh, okay, we can just do this.
You talk about meditation and you break it up, mindfulness and concentration.
For trauma survivors, more than mindfulness, we might actually need to develop concentration practice. So think of it this way. When we're triggered, we're like all over the place, right? We need to have that capacity to go right where we need to go, despite all this chaos. It's like we have to guide ourselves through the muck of life. And that's what concentration practices develop in us. I'm going to go here, even though this is making me crazy. I'm just going to go right there. I'm going to take that next step. And I think that's really underplayed in the meditation world. And so I think those of us who have trauma, that capacity of concentration is critical. Critical. Whether it's metta, whether it's any kind of focused meditation, when you stare at a candle, whether you singing, whatever it might be, really develop that. And then also be skillful at just weaving it back and forth, and be able to, I gotta focus, but I'm so scared, I'm just gonna say, that's the fear, you name it, that's the mindfulness, but I'm gonna focus right now on where I wanna go. People just start changing when they feel like they have some control over their inner world.
I wonder if you could describe what being triggered is for those people who don't know the concept well.
That's such a great question. All of us are going to have different experience of triggers, but it's really when we're overly reactive, when something feels too big to handle in our own body. If we think about, many people know about the window of tolerance. It's like when we're outside our window of tolerance, we can't take it. And we also know the more traumatized we are, the smaller our window of tolerance will be. And so it's going to feel like we're reactive all the time. Somewhere in one of my videos online, I talk about the pyramid of triggers, where the most, like say we're going down the street and somebody hits our car, that's like an acute trigger that happens in the moment. But then let's just say we might have kind of everyday triggers, that happen. They seem to happen a lot and we get activated. Then there's a state trigger, that a very chronic kind of trigger. Many people will come in and say, I'm always anxious. I'm always depressed. I wake up in the morning and I'm depressed. Well, we can begin to wonder, might that be what I call a parallel life we talk about in the book? Might that be something from the past that's coming into the present, but it's so chronic? Might it be a body memory that perhaps every morning when you woke up as a kid, you had that gnawing feeling of something's wrong. You didn't know what to do. Or maybe some people have sometimes somatic feelings in their body. And it's like, maybe that is a signal from the past showing you about what it was like back then. And so how do you stay in the present moment and be connected to that? Link it together. So it's not just free floating. It's like, I'm here, but this is happening. How would I put that together? And people's body starts calming a little bit. So that's why I think of triggers as messages from the past to guide us or to heal us. But when we're in the middle of a trigger, it's really hard to break that apart. Which links it to the other part of in the BSE, I talk about parallel lives. We're here right now, it's 2021. But when the past intrudes, and this is an idea from attachment theory, the past intrudes into the present moment, and it's like we don't know that we're no longer here in this moment. We are in the past, and it's very confusing. And the more traumatized we are, the more confusing it will be. And it feels like it's happening now. And for so many people, the healing is very much about breathing, landing in this present moment, and then saying, okay, so this overwhelming feeling, it must be about the past. If I can't handle it now, imagine what it was like back then. And people begin to separate the past from the present. And then you can be in the present and extend a hand out to the past and link them together. And as that happens, it just becomes easier and easier, and people get more solid inside.
So his triggering is related to undigested material that has been encapsulated.
Yes, Alex, you're good.
See, I've read the book. When the capsule breaks, then all of a sudden the person, like, what's going on?
Right.
Yeah.
The idea of time capsules. So let's say the first time we learned how to ride a bike and all the times we ride a bike, let's just say they're in a little time capsule. Let's say we had a really good experience about learning how to ride a bike. Yay, I'm so glad. So, but we can have positive triggers too, but they don't usually, well, sometimes they can overwhelm us. So we can look at that, but most of the times people get stuck in what hurts and what's bad and what's hard, like the time they got bullied and then all the times they got bullied. And so now when something even remotely looks or feels or tastes or smells like bullying in this moment, they go back into that old time capsule. All that explodes in the moment and boom, they're gone.
I like the way that you describe it, though, also as a sort of an opportunity that when that trigger erupts or that time capsule opens, that there's also that's material that's pointing the way of healing for you.
Yes.
That's as painful as it is. Obviously, we don't want to sort of, assume it's all lovely, but that there's the work, there's the moment right there where you get a window into whatever's unresolved, and then you get to apply some of these tools and skills to work through it. So if you were never triggered, or if you never had those types of eruptions, you wouldn't know what direction to go or what needed work or healing.
Right. And maybe there's a few lucky people on the planet who don't get triggered. And I'd like to meet them.
Right.
But my experience is even when we're solid and securely attached, you're going to get triggered. And then and what we do is we collapse down into our, the least healed place inside of us. Mm-hmm. And that's why building that inner platform is so important, so that when life intrudes, we have a place to land inside ourselves rather than just collapsing all the way to the ground.
You talk about the normal cycle when a need arises and then gets met, and the cycle completes. But for many of us who haven't had ideal childhoods, that cycle is interrupted, and as a result, the person concludes they are the problem. There's something wrong with me. I should feel shame. Am I getting that?
Right. I mean, if you think about it, it's just physiological in some ways. If I'm thirsty, I'm going to reach for water. I'm going to drink some water, and the need is complete. That's true psychologically or emotionally with us as well. It's like, okay, I need comfort. Okay, where can I get comfort? Oh, you're going to comfort, you're going to soothe me, you're going to say it's going to be okay. My body relaxes. Now, if we don't have that, what we might do as adults is the need for comfort comes up. What do? I turn to some kind of substance, eating, drinking, smoking, any kind of meds, anything, over-exercising, under-exercising, doing anything that will control that feeling. And that's where the cycle of addiction happens. It's the cycle of shame that starts happening, especially if we were made wrong or somebody humiliated us or told us there was something wrong with us, or all the many things that have happened to so many of us.
Yes.
I wonder if we could move to talking about another one of these skills around internal information flow. Help us understand what you mean by that.
Well, let's say, so what goes on inside? And most of the time, and somebody's been so congested with their experience, you say, what's happening inside? They won't know. They don't know how to turn their attention inside. So it's really about what are the simple building blocks of your inner world? And they're frankly thoughts, feelings, and body sensations. If we take them apart, say, okay, so what are you thinking right now? And when you think that, how are you feeling? Well, may or may not fit. So what do you do with the fact that they don't fit? And then what's the body sensation? And that's often where people say, well, I don't know. Nothing's going on. Mm-hmm. But something is going on. They just haven't learned that language, and they haven't learned how to slow it down enough to pay attention to, oh, that's a little jiggle somewhere inside, or that's a pulsing, or that's a constriction. And what we do, and what we are we're a meaning making machine. So we're trained to just like, oh, that means I'm X. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. I'm annoyed. I'm irritated. I'm enraged. Maybe it's just the power of your body just coursing through. Maybe it's life force. Maybe it's your chi, your prana, just moving through so powerfully. So you have to slow it down, take it apart, and find out what it is. And then we get the benefit of, if you don't like the way it's put together, how do you put it together in a different way?
Thinking of this experience of having a feeling in my body and right, that there's the mind kind of wants to jump to name it or describe it or like conceptualize it or sort of thingify it, kind of like, oh, that's anger, or oh, that's peace. But then just staying with the feeling in the body and letting it just sort of rise and fall away and sitting with it. There's a way that it sort of becomes its own processing. It doesn't always need that conceptual level or that explanation or something to work through.
So true. That may well be the biggest addiction we all have to let go of, is letting go of the story, so that whatever it is can rise, crest, and fall. Rise, crest, and fall, and just keep moving through.
Did you say letting go of the story?
Yeah.
You emphasize that healing from trauma is an Olympian endeavor, like the Olympics.
Well, part of the reason why I started thinking it was an Olympian task is because I really want people to feel respected and honored for the amount of time and effort and energy and money it takes to heal. And when I first was doing my healing, it was like, talk about it more shameful. You're not supposed, and as a therapist, you were never supposed to admit that you had an issue,
Right.
that it's supposed to be all put together. And yet I found that, like, I had worked through my trauma enough and have over time that it means so much to people that they're not alone in it. And so part of what I realized is that we take the shame away from the fact that we're healing, take the shame away from there's something wrong. This is when life comes through and gives us a hard time, there's a path through. It's transformational. It really is a transformational journey that we're on. And we should love it and respect it. We should value it. And that's where the whole idea of creating Olympic medals around it. I wanted people to say, yeah, you're so important. Look at what you've done. This is awesome. And that's what we try to do in the Safely Embodied learning community, is just really elevate people for the steps they're taking, no matter how small. That, yes, look at this. It's amazing. And then you can take the next step. And this, it's unending. I'm still taking so many thousand steps every day. But, I'm so influenced by the Advaita yogis, the non-dual teachers. Vedanta, I sat a lot with Jean Klein 30 some odd years ago. And it was all about just letting this moment be the gift of this moment and let it unfold into the next, and the Sufi is so much about, we're so loved. We are so loved. Can we just be in this moment of love? We are love. It's not like love is happening to us. We are love. How do we just remember that and move from that place?
Your program includes, or one of the skills in your book is carving out a new path. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about that.
So let's just say, and this comes from the attachment research as well, Carl Lorenz's work around imprinting. If we're, what he said with the goslings that he was aware of, is that what they would become aware of as their parent, their mother or father, was the first thing that they saw. And he tested it by putting them all in a box and then seeing, who did these goslings turn to? Did they turn to their mother, or did they turn toward him? Because he was the first that they saw. And that idea of imprinting then was something that John Bowlby really latched onto, and makes a huge amount of sense to me. So we are imprinted by these non-narrative attachment relationships that we have. And it's not just a thought, it's like everything. If we were around a lot of conflict growing up, we're going to experience the conflict in certain ways. If people yelled, we might end up being a yeller, or we withdraw and collapse and hide from it. So that's imprinted in our body, and that's the body response that we have. And so being in community helps us see, I can repattern that. But how do I find the new step? And that goes back to, here's the protest. What would I rather have? but I don't know how to have this new path. I don't know how to make that new step. So that idea that Robert Maurer said is, how do we do micro commitments? Carlin Lyons Ruth, the same thing. How do we build a scaffolding so it's the next tiny step? Okay, so that doesn't feel safe. Okay, what would be a smaller step to take so that I could do it? And how do I find the choice point where when I'm overwhelmed, how do I pause and just find the one small, quiet place so I can begin to turn in a different direction? I literally, in trainings or in groups, I'll have people write, so this is option A kind of, and this is option B, and you can draw it out or write it out and literally turn toward, okay, this is the old path. This is the old familiar path. This is what it feels like in my body when I'm here. I'm going to turn slightly and look at this new reality. And what's that like? And what's it like if I take one step toward that? And how do I make it so small that it's like, oh yeah, right. This is the next thing to do. So that's where the whole idea is, and then bringing it down into very concrete ways to do it.
That one small step feels so important as you're starting to learn that you have choice, especially when you're activated. You can kind of go, oh, tiny little change, a tiny little choice point, 1 degree different in a different direction. I often think of like in sailing, if you just move 1 degree in the different direction, then like 5 miles out, you'll be like completely different place. Right. Like even if it's a tiny change, it's something active that you're learning. Yeah.
And then pausing and saying, okay, so what are the thoughts I have when I do this? What are the feelings? What are the body sensation? Really orienting to what's good, what feels good about it.
There's one other skill that I want to see if we can get to. We haven't had the chance maybe today to cover every last one of them, but that's okay. People will have to go to the book. But the finding guidance from your older and wiser self. I'd love to just hear you say a few words about that skill.
Well, I got this in part from Jean Houston, probably, I don't know how many years ago. But the idea is that we can go forward in time, and it's all imagination, right? Now, go forward and imagine there's an older, wiser part of us that's already navigated this, already gotten there, and they know the path forward. And so how do we actually go to that part of us and let that part sort of guide us in meditation to the next step, and then another next step if we want to, but to show us and reassure us that there's a path forward. And it also links into the linking together of the past with the present, because the child parts of us are lost and feel like, oh God, look at all the past keeps recreating, bad things keep happening, I'm never getting X, Y, and Z. And so part of what we're doing in the 2021 experience is say, here we are. How do I show this child part? Oh, look, we've made it this far. And so it's the same extension for our future self. 89 years old, maybe. That 89-year-old knows as she's walking around town or sitting in a rocking chair or whatever she's doing, she knows that you've made it already. And you've actually made it work out well because she has.
Another section that really spoke to me is you write, if we're guided and mentored and urged to become who we are, not the expression of somebody else, then we develop trust in ourselves and our motivations. We learn mistakes aren't there to shame or humiliate us, but to course correct and guide us. So that's, wow.
So much a wow. Like how many of us were taught, like, it's okay to make a mistake.
So true.
Otherwise, we end up living in shoulds and oughts and ideas of what other people came up with, how we should be, how humans should be.
And it disconnects us from our own inner wisdom. That's what's so difficult about it, is that we then start doubting ourselves and distrusting that, oh, this impulse is here. That means to do this. Or I don't like this person, but I should like this person. But why don't I like this person? Is it a projection, or is it like my inner wisdom saying, no, this isn't really good right now?
Right. We're so often taught to doubt that inner wisdom or to ignore it. So sort of connecting again back to that older, wiser self, I think, is also that you do have that inner wisdom, that some part of you knows where you want to go or knows what life would look like, in this sort of future, older, wiser version of yourself. And you can move towards that. I was listening to a book about a woman who's a runner, and she was describing this visualization where she was running after a visualized version of herself ahead of herself on the course. And she was sort of mirroring the stride and whatever to try to keep that pace or something, and sort of connecting that to this idea too, that there's this sort of part of ourselves that sort of is growing ahead, and we can kind of move towards that.
Well, this is all couched in all the work we know about positive psychology and peak performance, that there is a way to train ourselves to actually be who we have always felt we wanted to be. Like, we feel like we want to be more, we want to do more. There's something inside that's trying to become alive and extend itself into the world. We don't know how, but first of all, we have to learn to listen to that and trust it, and then trust that next step that comes.
One thing I feel like I haven't heard enough of in general is the idea of hope. And you write about how to move from despair to hopefulness and support perseverance for finding the way through. That's very helpful to actually name it, because I think it's easy to be like shame. Perhaps despair is also difficult to face.
Right. That comes from John Bowlby's work in attachment theory. He and his colleague, James Robertson, said there were 3 phases to the separation distress. The first phase being proactive protest, the second phase being despair, and the third phase being detachment. And what they showed with kids in World War II, as they were taken away from their families, that this progression was there. And so what I did is I oversimplified it, and rather than saying there are these 3 stages, even if we look at dissociation, we can see there's active protest, there's despair, and then there's the detachment. We can look at it as dissociation. Is what if we just call it all protest? So when we're despairing, what do we need? What do we need? There's something we need. It might be comfort, it might be soothing, it might be something. And how do we then trust ourselves to actually build a world around that?
Nice.
Beautiful. So there's the book, and I wonder how you recommend people use it. And then you also offer 2 communities.
Well, we have a lot of things, but yes, we do. And one of the things that has blown me away around the Safely Embodied Learning community is how people are so invested in it. In fact, they're so invested that a small group of them said, okay, we meet twice a month with me. But they said, they wanted to support other people. So that 3 of them now hold this group, and other people come and join them. So there's an ongoingness. It developed from within. And it's like, wow, where they literally just practice skills, support each other, encourage each other. And we've migrated from not just using these simple BSE skills, but the whole panoply of all of the different skills and trainings that I've done. So it's really, really an amazing gift for me to be with people and celebrate them and see, wow, look at what it's like.
And what do the communities involve?
With the Safely Embodied Learning communities, I teach a couple times a month. I go in and I'll take some idea, something that we're talking about. Like we might talk about attunement. Okay, so what exactly is attunement and how do we get there? So we take about half the time exploring it as a concept, and then the other is answering question and answer so that you can actually use it and put it to practice in your life. So it's not just conceptual. Sometimes I'll do it as a retreat. Sometimes I'll do it as just a practice session. I'll say, pull out a piece of paper, let's draw it, let's do this. One of the things that frustrated me was that therapy was getting so expensive. And I understand, as a therapist, I understand the whole pieces around it, but I don't want to leave people behind. And I know how hard it was for me when I was healing, and I'd go to therapy once a week, twice a week, maybe if I was lucky. But what about the rest of the hours of the day? How do I deal?
Yeah.
But how to deal with it in a positive way. I know Chris Germer said what I was doing was a radically positive approach to healing trauma. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's so key. It's like, how do we have people feel good about themselves and value themselves and see the gift that they are and keep growing? And what we see is people get better. And that is cool.
I love that. Yeah. And that power of being in a community, I think, is so important. As we were saying before, so much of the world just doesn't get it in terms of what a Olympian or epic journey it is to heal from trauma. So to be around other people who do get it, I think is really important. So we're thinking it's probably about time to wrap up, and want to thank you again, Deirdre, for all your insights. We could chat about this stuff all day, but if people want to learn more from you or study with you, what can they do? Where can they go?
Well, the easiest thing is my website, dfay.com, dfay.com. There's also, they can find out more about the book that we're giving away at a really reduced rate. It's dfay.com/BSE book, BSE book. That would get you the book for $10, and that includes free shipping. So that's one of the main ways. If people want to see an excerpt, before they try to do a sample book, there's they can go to dfay.com/gift, and they can download the sample there and test it out.
Wonderful. It's very generous of you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Total pleasure. I love talking to you guys. You're amazing. And thank you for doing what you're doing in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.